problem? The problem is, so we have discussed in the past the difference between witnesses who are contradicted and witnesses who are disproved, conspiring witnesses. And we discussed that at great length in the last couple of weeks. And we said that if you're with the conspiring witnesses who were disproved, then we believe the second group and we don't believe the first group. And we impose the punishment on the first group, that the punishment is that we do to the first group that which they wanted to impose upon the defendant, whatever that would be. And we didn't spend too much time about thinking about the cases where two groups of witnesses contradict each other. And in those cases, we don't believe either. We send them both home. That's what we said. That's what we said in the past. Now we get to all sorts of problems that arise from the scenario where you have two groups of witnesses and that are contradicting each other, and you have to believe and you have to send them both home. What kind of problems does that scenario awaken? That's what we're going to discuss. If you just excuse me one moment, I'm going to try to adjust the lighting here for just 1 second, then we'll jump right back in. Not sure if this is better or worse. Who knows? Okay. So, what are the problems that arise when you have two groups of witnesses that contradict each other, as we have over here? So, one scenario, and that's the opening scenario, is what happens if these people, both these groups, do they lose credibility? I guess the big question is, do they lose credibility in other cases as well? So we know about this matter where they have been contradicted, we don't trust them. But what does that do to their credibility about other cases? So let's start with the easy case where there's no Talmudic dispute, and then we get to the cases that are a little bit more complicated. So we have group 1 and group 2 contradicted each other. Group 1 shows up and says there was a crime committed on Greenwich Avenue on Sunday. Group 2 shows up and says we were there, we were having lunch, and there was no crime committed on Greenwich Avenue at that time in that place. So what do? We send them both home. Why do we send them both home? Because we don't know who to trust, so we send them both home. So we assume that there's someone here is not telling the truth, but we don't really have a way to determine who that is, and therefore we send them both home, but we don't consider them lying. If we knew who was lying, we would impose a punishment on one of them, but we're not sure about that. Okay, so let's take an easy case. What would you say if this scenario happened today? Next week, there's a new case, unrelated case, and you have a member of group 1 and a member of group 2 come together to testify about a third unrelated matter, right? So on Monday, there's a dispute about the crime that happened on Sunday. One group of witnesses, group A, says it happened. Group B says it didn't happen. We send them both home. And then a few days later on Thursday, two witnesses show up to testify about a matter. So it happens to be that these two witnesses one of them is the witness of group A few days ago, and the other one is a witness of group B from a few days ago. So would you trust this group or not? That's the first case that Maimonides is going to discuss. And the answer that Maimonides gives, quotes the Talmud, he says you cannot trust this group that is comprised of two witnesses from two separate groups that contradicted each other. Why can't you trust them? Because we don't know on Monday, we don't know who says the truth and who's lying. But what we do know is that one of these groups is saying the truth and one of these groups are lying. So now, a few days later on Thursday, if you have a new case with one person from group A and one person from group B, we know for sure that one of these people have lied in the past. And we know that you need two witnesses, two trustworthy witnesses to establish the matter. And therefore, in this case, we're not going to trust either of them. We have to throw out the case because there's two groups, there's two witnesses, but we know for sure that one of them lied in the past. So that's the case is relatively straightforward, and I believe that this case is not in dispute in the Talmud. I think that's unanimous. So let's read it in Maimonides, and then we'll see where things get a little complicated. So the following, I'm reading chapter 22, section 1. The following rules apply when two groups of witnesses contradict each other. If one witness from one group came together with one witness from the other group, and they delivered testimony concerning another matter, in other words, on the third day, they came to testify about an unrelated matter, the testimony is of no consequence. For certainly one of them lied, but we do not know which one. In other words, we know on Monday, this past few days, when we had that case of two groups of witnesses contradicting each other, we know for sure that one of them lied. What we don't know is who lied. So therefore, we send them both home. But we know that there's certainly a liar amongst one of these groups. In other words, one of these groups are not saying the truth. So now, a few days later, Thursday, if you have two witnesses, and we know one of these people lied, their testimony is of no consequence. So that is a relatively straightforward case from the Talmud, and that's an interesting case. Now we get to a case that I'm going to give you the background. The background is that in the Talmud there's a dispute, and Maimonides had to rule and decide what he thinks the ruling should be. And the ruling indeed follows Maimonides. We'll get to that in a moment. Okay. So where do cases come? Where do cases come a little bit more complicated? And I believe, to the Maimons, I believe that we have discussed this in the past. So if you heard it already, I think we discussed it in the past. But here it goes. So you have two groups of witnesses that contradicted each other. We said you send them both home. What happens if one of those groups show up to testify? Again, we just spoke about a case where there was one of each group combined to make a test to testify. Then we say we can't believe them because we know for sure there's a liar. But Group A and Group B contradict each other. Next week, Group A shows up, an unrelated matter, and Group A says, we are testifying about an unrelated loan took place. Would you believe Group A? Now, there's another problem, because Group A, let's say you believe them, maybe tomorrow Group B is going to show up and testify about an unrelated matter. And over time, it turns out that we know for sure we accept a testimony from someone who did not say the truth. So this is tricky, because a week later, Group A shows up and testifies. Now, we don't know that Group A lied. We know that between Group A and Group B, that one of the groups lied. But we don't have any certainty about Group A. So what does that do to the credibility of Group A regarding an unrelated matter? That's a fascinating question, and it's so interesting that the Talmud can't decide. There's two opinions. If anybody wants to share their opinion, what they would think, it would be interesting, because of why they would think so. It would be interesting because this is a compelling problem. On one hand, how could you trust witnesses that you're not sure they may have lied in the past? Because Group A may have lied in the past. On the other hand, could you not accept the testimony when you're not sure that they're not saying the truth? So this is an interesting question, in my opinion.
Rabbi?
Yes.
I don't understand how is it different from one person from Group A and one person from Group B, because you cannot trust either one can be lying. So how is it different when the whole group shows up?
Okay. So the first case, one of Group A and one of Group B show up, There's no question. We know for sure that someone here lied. We cannot trust their testimony. That we agree upon, right? Vicky, we both agree upon that. That's not a problem. Let's give you
right, but the whole group B is also the whole group A for that matter, also in question.
1 second. The first case, there's no question. We know for sure when there's one individual group A, one individual group B, we know for sure that someone lied here. So when they show up on Thursday to testify about an unrelated matter, there's only one witness. There are no two witnesses. We don't know which witness is lied, which witness lost his credibility. But we know for sure that amongst these two people, there's certainly one not kosher witness. So that's certain. That's not a doubt. This case that we're talking about now was a doubt. Why is it a doubt? Because on Monday, two groups of witnesses contradicted each other. We know somebody lied. We don't know who. We send them both home. On Thursday, let's keep it easy. Thursday, group A shows up. And we don't know that group A lied. Let's say 50% chance that they lied. We don't know. So we're in doubt.
So how is it different then? Because we don't know.
Because the first case is certainty.
Oh, okay. So there is kind of, there is a doubt.
The first case is certainty. Second case is doubt. We don't know. But what I'm saying is not 100% accurate because let's say on Thursday, Group A came to testify about an unrelated matter. And let's say the next Monday, or in other words, a different time, Group B came to testify about an unrelated matter. Oh, now we get a little tricky, right? If you're gonna believe Group A independently, you have to believe Group B independently. And then Vicky's gonna say, what's the difference? How could you believe them both? We know somebody lied. So let's start with the easy case.
Go
ahead.
I have a question. You said if both of them are lying, we send them both home. But what if they testify about somebody's murder? You said that they should risk also capital punishment. So people, one of them should be killed, and still we don't know who, so we send them home. It seems like, there was serious crime committed by one of the witnesses, and we don't punish nobody.
Right. We can only do what we know. We can't act upon what.
Yeah. I thought you would say that. But what if one person killed somebody and then another person showed up and said, "No, actually, I killed that guy." We send them both home because we don't know who killed him.
We're touching upon another issue. There's another problem that we have within the Jewish system, which is we don't accept self-incriminating evidence. But that would lead to other problems. If somebody walks into court and says, "I killed somebody," even if he's not contradicting anybody, self-incrimination, even if it's not coerced. In America, you can't coerce someone to testify against themselves.
Okay. I'll get out of this. There is evidence that one person killed somebody, and there is evidence that another person killed that person. So we send them both home. We investigate. Why don't we investigate these two witnesses who is lying? It's the real crime, if it is the same kind of crime.
Okay, so let's think about this for a second. If there's a case that you have evidence that I committed a crime, then you should investigate. Okay? Let's assume you didn't find any proof. If you found proof, then you would prosecute me. Over here, let's take a scenario where the only evidence is he said, she said, right? You get to court, even in America, you have a big problem that a lot of cases boil down to he said, she said, right? And then it's a question of credibility. It's not a question of empirical evidence that you can bring DNA or bring fingerprints, which they didn't have in those days. So now it's a question of credibility. Now, in the American system, Warren Stern's not here this morning, but in the American system, we don't really have tools to determine credibility. Basically, we tell the jury, you decide, you follow what you feel, you decide, you make a judgment about the credibility of the witnesses, right? So basically, there's no real system to do it. In the Torah does get into the questions of, in certain scenarios, certain people lose their credibility, and therefore, even if you think that they have a compelling story, you can't accept it because their credibility has been undermined. So we're talking about a case, there is no other evidence. It's he said, she said. It's a question of credibility. And that's what we're trying to determine. And that's why it's very different than what you would hear in American law, because American law is not really interested in telling you who is credible. They leave that to the jury. And there's certain advantages to that system, don't get me wrong. But they're leaving that to the system. But we want to say, we discussed this in the past. I think you mentioned, we're trying to create statistics. In other words, we're trying to create some system of when we think that people would lose their credibility or maintain their credibility. So now in this case, what I mean, you send them home. It doesn't mean close the case. It doesn't mean stop investigating the crime. It doesn't mean don't search for new evidence. But it means if it's one person's word against the other person's word, and there's no way we investigate their testimony and that we didn't find any fault in any of the testimony, then we have no choice. But in other words, it's almost like the two witnesses, the two stories cancel each other out, and therefore we cannot do anything. Now, by extension, someone here lied, and by extension, like you say, the witnesses themselves committed a crime. We just don't know which one. So but that's part of the thing. If we don't know, if it's he said, she said, if it's just my word against your word, there's no way, and there is no way of determining it. If there is, we have to investigate. If like I said, we discussed this, that the judges were relatively good at questioning witnesses and investigating witnesses. But in this scenario where it's his word against my word. So here you send them both home because there is no because we don't have any choice. Now the question is, so we have people where their credibility is in doubt. So now the question becomes, could someone whose credibility is in doubt, does that take away the credibility? In other words, what do you do in a situation of doubt? If you know for sure a person lied, he lost his credibility. If you're in doubt of whether a person lied, what should that do to the person's credibility? That's really the question.
Well, but is there a difference between testifying when you're in doubt in the criminal case or is the civil on the monetary case?
It's the same principles. On the Torah system, in some laws there's differences, but in these laws of credibility of witnesses, it's the same question. In other words, if two witnesses contradict each other about a monetary law or they contradict each other about criminal law, either way we're gonna have the same conclusion, because it's not a question about the dollar. It's not a question about $1 million. It's not a question about lashes or about human life. It's a question about credibility of people who we're in doubt about. If we're in doubt about someone's credibility, do we trust them? It's a yes or no question. Now, in other matters, we say that for criminal law, you need a higher burden of proof. But I don't think we say that in this matter. In this matter, we're simply trying to figure out if you can trust them, you can trust them about everything. If you can't trust them, you can't trust them about anything. I think that's the scenario here.
So it's just a matter of character.
It's a matter of credibility, character credibility. In other words, right. I don't want to say character. You could be a good person or a bad person, but if we assume you're going to say the truth, but then we know you didn't. So now I know you're not. In other words, once I give you reason to assume that my word doesn't mean anything to me, then there's no reason for you to take my word and give me credibility of a witness. In other words, remember, the system of the Torah gives a lot of power to witnesses, and therefore, because there's so much power, there's a lot of responsibility, and therefore, we're quick to take it away. If a person lied once 10 years ago, he loses his credibility. There's a separate question: could I ever get my credibility back? That's a separate question. But let's assume for now that we're very careful. If you lied once, all you have is your credibility. All you have is your reputation. All you have is that people think you say the truth. But if we know you walked into court and you said a non-truth yesterday, then there's absolutely no reason under the sun that we should assume that today, all of a sudden, you're a kosher witness. But again, that's when there's reality. Here, we're not sure. We are in doubt. So if we're in doubt about group A, Group A, do we know they committed a crime? No, we don't know. So what does that mean? When we have a situation of Group A we're not sure about, what does that do to Group A? Does that allow us to should we trust them or not trust them when we're in doubt? An interesting question.
There is another issue. Not just that witnesses come out free even though one of them committed a crime, but it negates the entire principle of witnesses. Suppose I killed somebody and there is a witness who says I killed that person. Then I ask my friend, look, show up and tell them that I was at some other, contradict that witness. And he will tell me, well, but I have a risk. No, you have no risk. They will both, if you contradict him, they will send you both home. So just show up, here are a couple of bucks. And that's it, there are no witnesses.
That's a very good question. I hate to make a joke, but it's a practical question. Practical questions. No, but seriously, the protection against the scenario that you're portraying is that in some cases, that's part of the system here. In some cases, we don't believe that they don't cancel each other out. If you show up and you testify and you were not there, chances are that somebody would say you were not there and someone would say you were elsewhere. And that's a risk. Remember, we're living in a shtetl, so everybody knows everybody. If I say I was having lunch on Greenwich Avenue, it's likely that somebody else, remember, there's no privacy, right? Everybody knows everybody. It's very likely somebody would say, what are you talking about? You were drinking schnapps with me at what they used to call a kretschmer. I don't know what language it is. You were drinking schnapps with me at the inn, right? So you're taking a risk. So I understand that sometimes you could, in other words, when I show up to give a statement in court, it's like, I may cancel the other one out and I'll go home unscathed. That may happen, but it also is likely that I will be exposed and then I will be punished because I will be considered a conspiring witness. And we discussed this at length, that the conspiring witness is when we know that the witness wasn't there. The contradicting witnesses is that they're both talking about the case. The conspiring witnesses is if I show up and say I saw the crime, and somebody else comes and says you didn't see the crime, you were in California, they'll believe the second group. But if you're hiring the second group to lie, then what are you going to say? The second group, let's say, so Zach, you're hiring me to testify that Group A was not in Greenwich. I'm going to say Group A wasn't in Greenwich. You're with me in Miami. Okay, but now I'm exposing myself because it could be I was not in Miami. So the point of the matter is that we do have some protection. I understand it's not absolute protection, but when I'm going into court and testifying anything, I'm exposing myself. All that person has to say is you were not in this town, you were not in this location at this given time, right? You don't have to prove, you don't have to know the case, you don't have to be there, right? If you think about it, I think it's easier to disprove. Think about this for a second. I'm developing this as I'm thinking, so I may be wrong. But let's say you're Group A, you testify that a crime happened on Greenwich, or forget about a crime, a loan or a crime happened on Greenwich Avenue. I'm Group B, and I say there was no crime on Greenwich Avenue at that time, right? I'm opening up myself as Group B to a much more intense interrogation. I have to explain. They're going to ask me questions about where I was. They're going to ask me questions about what happened on the avenue at that moment. They're going to ask me questions how I know it didn't happen. There's going to be a whole list of questions, and if I'm lying, they're going to be able to expose me pretty easily. But if I'm just if I'm just coming and saying, Group A, Zach was with me in Miami, right? It's almost easier for me to say that because the burden of proof that I have to prove is much less. I don't have to prove that I know anything about the underlying case. I just have to prove that you were with me in Miami, or prove that my story has to stand up that you were with me in Miami. So what I'm trying to say is that in the witnesses that contradict each other, it's not that you say there was a crime, I show up and say there was no crime, and they send me home. If I'm going to say I was there and there was no crime, that's a story, and my story is going to have to stand up to investigation, at the scrutiny. And the point is that they scrutinize both parties, both groups, and we don't know what to do because both people, there's a good group of liars here. Both people seem to be saying the truth. We cannot find a hole in any of their testimony, so we're going to send them home. So I consider this 50% chance that one of these groups lied. Okay, what happens to their credibility? So the easy case, I'll give you two easy cases actually. One easy case we already said, that 2 days later, one member of Group A shows up and one member of Group B show up together in a partnership as a new group of witnesses about an unrelated matter. That's an easy case. Someone here lied. One of these two groups of witnesses lied. You send them both home. I'm sorry, yeah, you send them both home. We have no credibility. Another easy case, which we didn't say yet, is at a later point on Thursday, Group A and Group B, by coincidence, show up in courts together at the same moment to testify about something, about two unrelated cases. But they both show up before the court together. Right? In America, it doesn't work that way. In America, you get called and you have a list and they call your case and they don't call two cases together. But in the Talmudic system, it was more, you come into the academy, you come into the yeshiva. The court and the law school was together. So in other words, you show up and you ask your question, and then the law professors sit down as a judgment. So all of a sudden, a Thursday, Group A and Group B, both of them together come and start testifying about unrelated matters. We say, ladies and gentlemen, you're both here together. You're in one party. We're sending you home because some of you are lying. The tricky case is if they don't show up together. The tricky case, if only one group shows up on Thursday, Group A shows up, and now they want to testify. So what do? Do you accept them because you're only in doubt, or do you say we're in doubt, we cannot accept them? Now, if you accept Group A, are you going to accept Group B on the next week? And if you do accept Group B on the next week, then it's almost also Vicky's going to say, what's the difference? Because Vicky's going to say that you ended up accepting two groups of witnesses, and you know for sure that one of them is lying. That's a problem. So that's why this case is like that's why it's a complicated case. It's a big problem. We like problems. That's why we study Talmud. We don't like easy solutions. If we like easy solutions, we wouldn't be studying Talmud. We like to create problems where there's no problems. So this is why this is an interesting case, because there's a compelling argument on each side. There's a compelling argument to say, how could you believe somebody if there's 50% chance that he lied? There's a compelling argument to say, I'm Group A, look at me. Don't look at other scenarios. Don't look at what's going to happen on Monday. Today, I'm before you. You don't know that I lied. You have to accept my testimony. Okay, this is fun.
Rabbi, this seems to be a huge flaw in the system. I'm not talking about co-conspired witnesses, I'm talking about co-conspirators. One guy is actually did the killing, and another guy was there, so he will go through all the scrutiny. He was there, he saw everything, and he would be the one who contradict a real witness.
You need two witnesses, Zina, right?
We have two witnesses. One is fine, it's someone. Another one is actually not a witness. He is a co-conspirator. He is a part of a crime.
Right.
He was there specifically for this purpose. So he would go through all the scrutiny. He was there, someone saw him. But as a matter of fact, he would say, no, crime wasn't committed. And that it's a huge, really huge flaw.
I'm not disagreeing with you on the practical side. I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just going to say that he's going to have to find another co-conspirator to be able to join him in the group, right? Because so he's lying, so he's going to have to find another liar with him, and the protection against that is the assumption that it's not impossible, but it's not easy to lie perfectly. It's not easy for two people to make a perfect lie. So it's possible, if you really know what you're doing, if you went to school, an acting school, or you know what you're doing, it's possible to do this. You're right. Every system is going to have flaws. I'm not going to sit here and make the argument that the Torah system is perfect. Absolutely not. But I would say that you're right. But you would have to do that. You would have to have a co-conspirator. In other words, you have to have the criminal. You'd have to have one witness, but two witnesses conspiring to lie. Two witnesses conspiring to lie gives you that ability to investigate them separately and independently and find flaws in their story. It's not impossible to lie, but it's not as easy as it looks.
Okay.
I'm not going to argue with you about is it easy to manipulate the system or not. It doesn't, for the purpose of our discussion, it doesn't. I'm willing to concede that it's easy to, even if it's easy to manipulate the judges. I would say, listen, that's the system. If it's easy to manipulate, very good. That's just the way it is. And then, but again, our discussion then becomes the reason why we gathered today is to figure out not so much how to manipulate systems, but what do I do if I'm not, I see a person opposite me. Do I assume, and there's a doubt whether they lied, do I assume that they lied or do I assume that they did not? That's really the question here. But again, your point is a good point. It's possible that there's a flaw in the fact that it's easy to manipulate. And it may or may not be. Again, I'm not an expert on this, and I don't have any studies one way or the other. But I would say that it's probable. Remember, we're talking about experienced litigators. The judges, there's no lawyers there, but the judges are experienced litigators. And lying is, unless you're really good at this, lying is harder than it seems. And getting two people to lie together, oh my God, that's even harder. Again, I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying it's a little harder than it seems. When we were kids, I think I mentioned this before, when we were kids and we had birthday parties, one of the games, you got to play a game with the birthday party. So one of the games they would play is conspiring witnesses. And basically you send out two people and they're supposed to make up a story. And then we investigate them and you separate the two and they made their conspiracy, whatever the conspiracy is. And then we bring one in and we ask them questions. What color were the shoes? What color was the guy's face? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then we call in the other guy. And then you see how long it takes you to expose the lie. So I'm biased because I remember all those games in the second grade, and it's not as easy. It's not as easy as it seems. But again, this is not a scientific discussion between me. In other words, I don't have scientific proof of how immune this system to manipulation. How immune is this system to manipulation? I don't know. I'm willing to concede that to some degree, it's every system could be manipulated. So I'm conceding that point. But assuming that we're in a scenario where there was a crime, or there wasn't even a crime. Okay, I guess a denied loan, I guess is also a crime. There was a loan, there was a crime. We have witnesses, we have contradictory witnesses. I'm the court. My question is, how do I move forward? What do I do? How do I move forward? If new evidence emerges, very good. If new evidence does not emerge, what do I do with the fact that I have contradictory witnesses? So one scenario would be to, assume, again, we said the Talmudic system is you send them both home. In other words, we can't trust one, we can't trust the other. Okay, how do I move forward? What do I do if next week a group A shows up and testifies about an unrelated matter? What do I do? So I'll give you the two opinions of the Talmud, and then we'll see what Maimonides rules, and then you tell me if you like the ruling. You don't have to agree with Maimonides. You could not. It doesn't matter. Logically, both opinions have a logical basis, which is why they're recorded in the Talmud. One opinion says, when group A shows up on group A shows up on Thursday, and group B shows up the next Wednesday, you have to look at this group as an individual. You can't look at you don't look at the broader context. You look at these two people and you ask yourself a question. Do I know that these two people lied? Do I know for certain that these two people lied? The answer is no. If you, since the answer is no, you have to accept them. And therefore, one Talmudic opinion is each group can come independently and testify. Even though if you look at the scenario together, it's absurd. Right? If you say, we believed group A on Thursday, and we believe group B the next Wednesday, something is wrong because we're looking at the collective. But this opinion says, don't look at the collective. Look at the individual. There's a case before you. Do you know for certain they're lying? No, you have to accept it. Next week, group B shows up. They testify about an unrelated matter. Do we know for sure they lied? No, you have no choice. You have to accept it. Don't look at the big picture. Look at the case in front of you. That's one opinion. The other opinion says, he says, the expression of a Talmud is, don't get involved with witnesses who are lying. In other words, don't put yourself in a scenario where you're not sure. And therefore, the other opinion says, we don't believe either group A or group B. In other words, if you're in a scenario where you're contradicted, we won't believe either of the parties, even in unrelated cases. That is the other opinion. Like I said, even the opinion number one, okay, so these are the two opinions. Maimonides says, and Maimonides rules takes the opinion of the sage that says that you do believe them independently. So if I was contradicted, that doesn't mean that I lost my credibility. Next week, I could testify about an unrelated matter, and they'll believe me. Why? Because we choose to look at each case individually. We don't choose to look at case A, group A and group B together. We look at them individually. Going back to Vicky's point, Vicky, you remember when we said that if you have one member of group A and one member of group B combining to testify, then you must say it's not true. You must reject it. Why? Because you know for sure one of these people are lying. Why do you know that for sure? Because they're both here in front of you together. But if group A shows up, and you don't have to combine them with group B. Group A, you could look at group A individually. If group B shows up, you could look at group B individually. So each one, you can give them credibility. But if they both come together, remember we said that case? They both come together, here you can't believe them because you have no choice but to look at them together because they came together. So these are the two opinions. I'll be interested to hear what people think about these two opinions, of who they like and who they don't like. But before that, I just want to read it in the words of Maimonides. So at least we know that we spent 43 minutes and we read a full paragraph of Maimonides. This was a great accomplishment. I'm only half kidding. Okay, let's read the second half of section 1 in Maimonides. In the English, they make it 2 paragraphs, but in the Hebrew, it's 1 paragraph. If one of these groups comes alone and gives testimony, right? So 2 groups of witnesses contradicted each other on Monday. This is a week later. Group A shows up alone and testifies about an unrelated matter. And then the other group comes alone and gives testimony regarding another matter. So on Thursday, group A shows up and testifies about an unrelated matter. And then the next week, group B shows up and testifies about an unrelated matter. Says Maimonides, he makes a decision. Again, this is a big deal because in the Talmud, there's 2 choices, there's 2 opinions. Says Maimonides, we accept the testimony of both groups individually. Now, this thing opens up a whole nother group of cases of when do you consider them together, when do you consider them separate. And that's the entire continuation of chapter 22, which I would love to discuss next week. We'll see if we do. We'll see what happens. But that is the idea. That's the subject. So I think when we discussed this in the past, one way to think about it's not the only way to look at it, but one way to look at it is whenever you want to study something, the question is, what's the parameters of the discussion? You can't discuss something before you have the parameters of the discussion. And it seems like the Talmud is saying that when you look at group A that comes individually, and then you look at group B that comes on a different day individually, the parameters of the discussion is only the witnesses that are before you, and not looking at the broader cases. Let's look at all the cases that happened in the last month, and then let's see if there's any contradictions. We're only supposed to look at what is before us. That seems to be at least one perspective how to study this piece of Talmud. There are other ways to study it, but I just want to bring one more case. Why is this case interesting? It's an unrelated case, but the same principle. So here you see that the laws of the monetary laws and the laws of the religious laws, the laws of ritual are the same logic applies. So here's the scenario. The scenario is that let's put down the basic ideas. The basic idea is that if I touch a dead person, I become impure. Impure, whatever that means, I can't go to the temple until I go through the process of purification. So we have two streets, Street A, Street 1 and Street 2. You have two roads, road A and road B. One of them has a corpse on it, or under it, without getting into the details. One is pure and one's impure. I walked on one of those roads, but I don't know which road I walked. So I'm in doubt. So the law is, if I'm in doubt, I'm not considered impure. Okay, here's where we get interesting, similar to our case. What happens if two people walked on these roads? One walked on road A, one walked on road B. Now we know that one of these people are impure. We just don't know which one it is. Now they both come to the court to ask the sages, are we impure? What do? We know if you're in doubt, you are still considered pure. The problem is that they both showed up in court together. If they both show up in court together and they say, here's our scenario. I walked on group A, my friend walked in group B. We don't know if we're pure or not. Says the Talmud, they're both impure. Why? Because we know for sure that one of these people are impure, so how could we consider them pure? But, and this is the parallel to our case, if one person shows up alone and says, I walked on path A, they're going to say, you walked on path A? We don't know that path A is impure, so you're still pure. 2 hours later, another guy shows up and says, I walked on path B. Am I pure? So we tell the other guy, you walked on path B? We have no proof that path B is impure. And therefore, what do? We tell the other guy he's pure as well. So that's a very similar case. We know that between these two people, one person is impure, but we're able to look at each one individually. We're not forced to look at them together. If they both come to court together, then we have to look at them together. But if each one comes individually, we have the liberty to look at them individually. So that's possibly one way. There are other factors, but that's possibly one way of discussing, of explaining our law as well. When group A shows up, the question really becomes, could I look at them as their own unit, or do I have to look at them as part of a bigger story? And it seems that just like in the law of the two paths, one is pure and one's impure, you have the liberty to look at only one person at a time and look at that person without seeing the bigger picture. That is one way of studying this piece of Talmud. There's other ways, but I think that's for today. If anybody has any comments or questions or suggestions, that would be wonderful. Otherwise, have a wonderful day, and we will resume sometime in the future in good health.